Our guest is Judge William Billy Murphy Jr. He is the founder and senior partner of Baltimore's Murphy, Falcon, and Murphy law firm. Sir, if you can hear me, I think I'm a little loud in your system there. It might be causing some feedback for you, but we'll proceed as usual. Mr. Murphy, as a former judge, a community leader, and the attorney for Freddie Gray's family, what are you thinking about most today as you reflect on that tragic day involving Freddie Gray's death?
The primary thought is that this keeps going on. And as much of an outrage as was expressed in Baltimore and around the country about Freddie Gray, it didn't put a dent in the repetitious use of police excessive force causing death or serious injury. The show just keeps going on. And I've been asked many times, why does this keep happening? And that's because the treatment of black people by the police is so deeply ingrained in police culture that training of people who are predisposed to do it just doesn't seem to work. Exposure on television to serious penalties doesn't seem to prevent it. And so we have a serious problem, and that is that we have too many bad police officers on the police forces around the country who are steeped in the wrong way to treat black people.
And as you know, there is a George Floyd Policing Act that's in Congress. The Senate has failed to pass it thus far, and yet it is the most bold legislative proposal that could change some of these things that we see police officers do to black people. For example, as George Floyd's killing is described during closing arguments at the Chauvin trial today, and as protests continue over the country about what's happening to black men in police custody. What do you think about moving that forward legislatively, and what can we do to push that through the Senate since we're on the outside looking in?
I'm all for it, but it's not enough. What we need to do is prevent people who are psychologically unsuited to be police officers from getting on the force. And number two, we have to get rid of the ones on the force who are psychologically unsuited, which is a little bit more difficult. It's easier to screen them out in the beginning than it is to get rid of them at the end. You can only do that by analyzing meticulously their behavior, the number of complaints, the uses of excessive force, the uses of force period, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the problem that the legislation in Congress does not even pretend to solve. So we've got to get rid of the bad police, and we've got to prevent the police forces around the country from hiring psychologically unfit police.
Okay, we can go through a litany of things that have taken place that are basically part and parcel consistent with your argument. We've seen what happened to young Dante Wright there in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, a 20-year-old shot and killed when the 26-year veteran police officer pulled out a gun instead of a taser after yelling taser. And then we've just seen what happened to 13-year-old Adam Toledo in Chicago. When an officer yelled at this 13-year-old, "Show me your hands," he shows him his hand and he is shot. So we are today on the issue of police departments' use of force against black and brown people. Legislatively, as we've just stated, we know that Congress has it, but do they lack the political will to do it? And then we, the people, still have to live with this in our own neighborhoods, as we witnessed 6 years ago with Freddie Gray, and then we saw how violence erupted and rioting erupted in Baltimore when they acquitted these police officers.
Well, the problem in the Congress isn't that we don't have adequate legislation pending. The problem is that we have a Republican Party that's lost its way and is dominated by racism. When you're dominated by racism, you don't think there's anything wrong with the way blacks are being policed. And that's the view of the Republican Party. When you're dominated by racism, you don't do anything to get rid of it. That is the current view of the Republican Party. When you're dominated by racism, you don't even talk about its existence. And that's the current view of the Republican Party. And the black community knows who our friends are. It's certainly not those with a big R in front of their designation. And so until we get more Democrats elected who are sensitive to this problem. And by the way, this notion among some people that there's no difference between the parties is just demonstrably ridiculous. Until we get more Democrats, we're going to have continuous problems in those jurisdictions, in those areas of the country where racism is the order of the day, where it has never been the subject of debate among white people, where it is the predominant view of us. And it's no coincidence that the red states were the states where slavery was historically permitted, and the blue states were the states where there was an abolitionist movement that took root and caused us to fight the Civil War.
Your Honor, we'll have to leave it there. There's a lot more we could talk about. Judge William Billy Murphy, Jr., thank you for being a part of the program tonight and joining us on The World Tonight. Appreciate your hard work and your service, sir.
Thank you very much for inviting me.